Okay, so again, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you to this amazing installment of the Real Matriarchs of the Torah, presented by the lovely Talia Kushnick. So again, if Talia, this is somewhat interactive, so you guys can raise your hands. We'll make sure I'll be looking for that, and also you can put your questions in the chat. I'll be looking at that too. So we are ready to go. Turning over the floor to Miss Talia.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. I want to encourage any of you guys who don't have your cameras on to turn them on, even if your hair has its own zip code. It's a safe space, so we all want to see you guys. So thanks. I'm really excited to be with you all tonight. I think this might be the first adult ed program of the year, so that's exciting. We're kicking it off strong, so that's really wonderful. For those of you who were in our class in the spring, we did 2 sessions on Sarah. So we're going through each of the imahot, the matriarchs, and trying to make them a little bit more accessible, make them a little bit more real to us, and just think about who they are as people, what was happening in their minds and their experiences in the stories that we know so well in the Torah. And so tonight we're going to be focusing on Rebecca. So this is a jam-packed story. There is a lot going on here. It's a story that probably most of us are very familiar with, and that most of us have some real strong assumptions about the characters in the story. And what I want us to do tonight is challenge that a little bit and look at these characters, but in particular, look at Rebecca as a human being, and kind of all of the things that she was going through and all of the things that she was dealing with, the situations that she finds herself in, and how that informs some of the choices that she makes, and how that might inform some of the assumptions that we have made about her. So that's my goal for the program. I want to start tonight the way that we started off with Sarah, and just talk about the role of women in the Torah and what our job is as learners who are studying some of these stories. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be doing that on and off throughout the whole time that we're together. And I don't even think that I have facilitated a Zoom call since our last class together. So if I'm a little Zoom rusty, I'm sorry, but I will get there, I promise. So let's look at these 2 sources that we're just going to go through quickly, because for those of us that learned together in the spring about Sarah, we already looked at these sources, but I just want to remind us and put us in the right frame of mind when we're looking at this and when we're learning about Rebecca tonight. So, women in the Torah. Judith Plaskow, who is a famous theologian and a professor, she says that when we're reading these stories, when we're learning about women, we are exploring the terrain of silence, which we talked about this as in the spring, but I'm just bringing it back because I think this is such a powerful phrase, because really there is so little written. I mean, Rebecca's story is basically 2 chapters in the entire Torah, and we hear her voice so little. So for us to be able to understand her motivations, her thinking, the constraints she was under, her limitations as an individual, we have to go beyond the text. We have to kind of imagine what was happening with her. And that kind of brings us into this next text, the David Zucker text, where he says to hear the voices of biblical women requires rereading the ancient texts and trying to imagine more fully what was said and described and what was left unsaid and undescribed. So that is our work tonight. It's to read between the lines. And I want us to just all allow ourselves to play with this text and with the sources that we're going to be reading, and to just add our own interpretations to the mix, because this is exactly what all of the famous commentators were doing when they were writing their commentaries hundreds of years ago. They were just imagining either situations that helped to explain certain stories or words or whatever it was, or they were just adding what they thought might have been going on in these people's minds. So we need to feel comfortable doing that too. This is really the essence of learning Torah, is adding our own thoughts and perspectives and our life view onto the words, to making it relevant, making it new to us. That's what we're doing together. So I want us to just think for a minute about Rebecca. So like I said, this is a story that a lot of us are familiar with. She's a character that a lot of us have learned about for most of our lives. So tell me what you know. You raise your hand, pop it in the chat. What parts of her story, what about her do you remember? When you think about her, kind of what comes to mind? Let's just start kind of dumping everything. Or you could go find your kids or your grandchildren and ask them, because they're learning it in Hebrew school. So come on, think about it. I know you know stuff. So we know, okay, yeah, Richie.
She was the daughter-in-law that was brought over for Yitzchak, for Isaac, from Haran, and Eleazar was the one that went to seek the wife, the best wife for Isaac, and she was the one that answered all the checklists that he had created to himself.
Okay,
In the basic
great.
way.
So she's Isaac's wife. Eleazar, the servant, goes to get her and bring her back. What else do we know?
She feeds
Yeah,
the animals. Doesn't she feed the animals?
She feeds the camels, yeah.
Camels before the humans.
We have from Sherry that she was married to Isaac. She was the mother of Jacob and Esau, and that she favors Jacob. Yes. What is maybe her most famous story? What is she known for the most if we're talking about her sons?
Tricking Isaac.
Tricking Isaac. So can you say a little bit more?
When the two brothers, when Jacob wanted to get the blessing from his father, she was the one that suggested that they trick him, and he assisted, or she led the whole plot.
Okay, great.
And then the bottom line is that Jacob had to run away and stay away for many years, and then the rest of the story.
Right. Okay, great. So those are kind of, that's the basics about her. She's Isaac's wife. She's the mother of Jacob and Esau. We have the whole blessing situation and her role in that story, of course. But before we even meet her, so thank you everybody for all of that information. Before we even meet her, we're going to look a little bit more closely at what happens with Eleazar. So we know that Abraham sends his servant Eleazar to where he was born, to Aram Naharaim, to find a wife for his son. And Eleazar is given very specific instructions on who this woman needs to be. So let's look at that together. So in the Hebrew, it says, Ki el artzi ve'el moladati telech, v'lakachta isha livni Yitzchak. Go to my country, my relatives, and take a wife for my son Isaac. So these are the instructions, very, very specific and strict guidelines and stipulations for who this person needs to be. Why do we think we have such strict guidelines? Why is Eleazar given very, very specific criteria for this woman? I can't see hands, so if you see them, Cynthia, please let me know. Oops. Why can't I go back? So Isaac is not a normal person, right? He's not just your run-of-the-mill guy. He has a very, very specific job, right? The covenant, the breed, is going to be passed down through him. So he has to marry somebody that his father approves of, that is going to be the mother of the next generation in the covenant, right? So Abraham was given the Brit Bein Haptarim, that he is going to be the father of a huge nation, and that can only come through his children, right? So the next in line is Isaac, and Isaac needs a wife in order to fulfill his job of producing an heir, okay? So we have, Abraham is very, very invested in who this woman is. So let's look specifically at these stipulations and try to understand why these were specifically outlined to Eleazar. So 1, she must be from Aram Naharaim and not Canaan, not the land where we learned, in Lech Lecha, in the beginning of Abraham and Sarah's story, where he's sent from his homeland to a land that God will show him, and that's Canaan, which will be the future land of Israel, the promised land, right? So the woman cannot be from Canaan, from where they're living right now, but must be from where Abraham came from. So the question is, why? All right, why just not some woman that Isaac is able to meet, when he's doing whatever he's doing? And so our commentators tell us that the people of Canaan were considered to be evil people and they worshiped false gods. So that they needed to come from Aram Naharaim. But in Aram Naharaim, right, they also were pagans. They also were worshiping idols. So why specifically there? Why specifically from Abraham's family in Aram Naharaim? And the answer to that is because they had already seen Abraham go through this whole process of being, called by one God, believing in one God, and they respected what Abraham went through. So a woman from his family would kind of already understand what she was supposed to be taking on, wouldn't think that Abraham was crazy or that this new lifestyle was just out there and totally foreign because they'd been exposed to it a little bit. And the real question for me, which leads us into just taking a quick break from Rebecca and learning a little bit about Isaac, which will help us kind of understand Rebecca later on. Why can he not go in search of his own wife? Why must he stay back and Eleazar go? So a couple things. Number 1 is that Abraham cannot risk Isaac going to Canaan and deciding to settle there. He can only fulfill the covenant if he remains in the promised land, right? If he remains in Canaan, so that he can't go to Aram Naharaim. He has to stay where he is. That's 1. 2 is, if we're not focusing on Isaac in our time together tonight, but Isaac is a very passive figure. The stories and the things that we know about Isaac, most of the time, he is repeating actions that have already been taken by his father. He does not innovate. Things don't happen. They're not new. He's just basically a placeholder. So this really sticks with me that when I was in grad school and I was in a Hebrew class, we had to listen to some Hebrew article, and then it was a listening comprehension. We had to answer questions based on what we were listening to, and the whole article that was being read to us was about how Isaac was the mamshich, meaning that he just continued. His job was to continue the covenant. He had one job, and that was to have a son, to have an heir, so that the covenant could then be carried out through his child. Literally, that's his only job. And we see, Abraham is obviously super active. When we get down to Jacob, he is super active. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of stories about them doing things. The Isaac story, like the Rebecca story, is really 2 chapters. And in that whole time, we don't see many active nouns, action words around him. We don't see him go anywhere. We don't see him build anything. He just really has one job. Okay? So again, here, then it makes sense. He can't go anywhere. He can't go find his own wife. The wife will be brought to him. So let's look for a minute at Eleazar's prayer. Because let's put ourselves in Eleazar's shoes for a minute. He is being sent on this super important job, right? He has to find a woman. He has to find the right woman. He's given very specific guidelines for who this person needs to be, right? It's not like there are a ton of options. They have to be from Abraham's family. They have to be from a certain place. We just keep narrowing it down. And not only that, there's a lot riding on this match. So he's anxious. What if he can't find the right person? So he prays. And we are going to look at this prayer together. Does anybody want to volunteer to read it?
I can do it.
Great, thanks.
Where it says, and he said, I just want to make sure I'm reading
Yep.
the right screen. Okay. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw water. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Isaac. Thereby shall I know that you have dealt graciously with my master.
Great, thank you so much. So let's look closely together at verse 14. So Eleazar is kind of offering up a little test for this woman. And if we really break it down, what attributes is Eleazar hoping to find in a wife for Isaac based on this test?
Kind, generous, compassionate.
Yes, exactly. Sorry. Oh my goodness. And kind, generous, compassionate. If you think about those attributes, who does that remind you of?
Sarah.
What?
Sarah.
Sarah, right. So we are looking for a woman here who embodies the generosity, the hospitality, the kindness that were so emblematic of Sarah, right? So just further, continuing our backstory a little bit, Abraham does not even think about looking for a wife for Isaac until after Sarah passes away. Isaac is 37 years old when they finally start to go looking for this wife, for this woman. Sarah's presence was so huge, was such a major aspect of their lives that there was no room for anybody else while she was there. But once she was gone, then it opened the door into looking for another person to come in and maybe fill her shoes a little bit, or at least be the companion for Isaac. When she was there, they weren't thinking about it. But now, not only are they ready to find a wife, but Eleazar is looking for somebody who has the same qualities that Sarah did. So he's there at the well, he makes this prayer, and all of a sudden, Rebecca comes. Can somebody read this text for us, please?
I'll
He
read.
had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran toward her and said, "Please, let me sip a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, "I will also draw for your camels," until they finished drinking.
Thank you. So, does she pass the test? Right? She passes it immediately with flying colors. She's kind, she's generous, she's strong, she's acting quickly. She does everything that Eleazar is looking for and then some, right? So the question is this by chance, right? Does it just happen to be that as soon as he's done praying, this woman comes down? She is, as we see in verse 15, where it outlines her lineage very, very carefully, in a lot of detail. She is related to Abraham, check, right? She just comes down, she's exactly what he wants, she does exactly what he needs right off the bat. So my question is it by chance? And I would argue that it's not by chance. And this is when we begin to see Rebekah's personality right away. Immediately when we meet her, we're led to ask, what's going on here? Like, did this just happen, or what's going on? So we're just going to look at this verse again. So the maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. So Rabbi Rachel Druck has this beautiful interpretation where she says, some interpreters have even argued that Rebekah actively chose to marry Isaac rather than fall into a role that was assigned to her. Whom no man had known refers specifically to the servant Eleazar, who did not know that the moment Rebekah saw him, she understood that he was from Abraham's family and that he had come to find Isaac a wife. Immediately comprehending the situation, Rebekah began making her way towards the servant. What the servant did not know was that Rebekah had consciously agreed to and even orchestrated the betrothal before he said a word about it. So if we were to go with this interpretation, right, before we really look into it, if we go with this interpretation, what new attributes are we learning about Rebekah? Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, I mean, it seems somewhat cunning and calculating.
Okay.
That she sees an opportunity, right, and grasp it, somewhat opportunistic.
Okay, do you see that as a negative thing or a positive thing?
I don't think it's negative. I mean, you know, particularly, right, roles for women in that time. I mean, what would have been her fate had this not happened, right? Who was she going to be married off to? So, I mean, smart girl, she sees an opportunity and says, hey, I can change my fortunes. And it worked out for her, really.
Right.
I was thinking the same way. Is, she's a small town, think of a small town girl. Everybody, she knows everybody because she went to school all the way through, and somebody new comes into town. It's an opportunity to do something exciting. So cunning sort of bothered me a little bit because it sort of has, I don't know, feels a little negative, but maybe it was in a positive way that she was looking for a brighter future.
Mm-hmm. What did you say?
It also adds up with the next part of the story when she is asked by her father and brother, and she agrees to go, which wasn't a common thing in those times.
Right. Right. I don't have us looking at that. So thank you for bringing that up. She's asked if she wants to go, and she says, yes, I want to go. So we see a couple things here. One, she is taking control of her own life. She is an active figure. if we look at the words that are used around her, there are a lot of action verbs, right? She's also smart. I mean, Abraham and his children, you know, his family, he is a wealthy person. He is a powerful person. And it wasn't like Eleazar just showed up and all of a sudden, you know, people figured out what was going on. He came with a huge entourage of people, with animals. You know, this was what he was going to leave as a dowry. So he came with a lot of stuff. There were definitely scouts that saw him coming and were able to go back and tell the people what was happening and who was coming. And it was, you know, easy for them to understand what was going on. So she sees an opportunity, she seizes it, she's goal-oriented, she's willing to do what she needs to do to get what she wants, right? How do these characteristics, if we're looking at it through this interpretation, how did these characteristics make her a good match for Isaac, based on what I was just saying a couple minutes ago?
They're opposites.
They're opposites, right? We see Isaac is a passive figure, right? He's not a strong decision maker. He's not a very active person. He does not take control of situations. Rebecca's the opposite. So in a way, you know, that works. They can complement each other. And then how are these attributes that she has, how is that going to help her succeed in the future? We alluded to it earlier when we were talking about Rebecca. She's going to get her way, right? She's going to make sure that the son she thinks needs to get the birthright is going to get it, right? Because she's going to make sure that happens.
I mean, she's the boss. She's going to hopefully draw Isaac out of his shell. And if she doesn't, she's just going to take charge.
Right. She's going to get it done. So before she leaves Canaan, she has a very special and meaningful interaction with her family, which is notable. And I want us to look at it together. So does anybody want to read this quote by Rabbi Nathan Diamond? I can't see all the hands, so if somebody wants to read, just start reading. Okay, I can do it. All right.
I'll do it, Talia.
Okay.
Ashley's got it.
Okay, but don't make fun of me if I missay a word. Someone just jump in and correct me. All right, guys, we're in this together.
Yep.
Rebecca is the first woman in the Bible and the only one of the matriarchs to receive a blessing, one that echoes the blessing and promise given to Abraham, which eventually became the birthright passed down from one generation to the next. Before she leaves for her new life with Isaac, her family blesses her. May you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes. Receiving this blessing marks her as someone who has a central role within the covenantal framework. Perhaps not coincidentally, she is later instrumental in ensuring that God's, I said that word wrong.
No, you said it right.
Okay, thank you. Covenantal blessing is passed down to the next generation through the correct son.
Great, thank you. So here we also see a very important difference outlined between her and Isaac. So Isaac inherits the covenantal blessing. He was just born to the right person, right? A very passive way to receive such an important job. Rebecca earns her blessing, right? Her parents, her family wouldn't just give her this blessing if they didn't think that she was the type of person who ought to have it, right? Who ought to be the mother of a myriad of nations, right? Of thousands of people, right? Of a strong people. So we see again a very big distinction between Isaac and Rebekah, where she is given something that in an active way that we don't even hear about with Isaac. You know, he was just born, and so he fulfills this role. So this, I wanted us to look at this because it's just remarkable that, you know, she is our only matriarch to receive a blessing like this. And the blessing is so important, right? It's so central to this story, to Abraham's story. And typically the women are, you know, just kind of there, you know, it doesn't really matter who is bearing the children. But for her, like, she has a very integral role in this. This is her destiny as much as it is her children's and her husband's and her father-in-law's. So it marks her as being special. So she leaves with Eleazar and they travel back to Canaan, where she meets Isaac for the first time. Does anybody know the story, or can anybody tell us about their first meeting when she first sees Isaac? Do you remember anything about that? It is a very packed and charged couple verses. So we're going to look at that now, and we're going to spend.
From afar, I don't remember the details. He sees her from afar.
Mhm.
And they view each other from far away without knowing who each other is.
Right.
I'll
So
let somebody else.
Yeah, let's look at it together. Okay. So, and Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. So the question here is really, you know, what's happening? We can look at it on face value, and we can see, you know, Isaac was in the field, Rebekah's on her way. She sees him, she finds out who he is, she covers herself out of modesty, and, you know, they meet happily ever after, right? But really, you know, there's a lot more going on here. So the first thing to look at, in verse 63, it's generally understood that when it says, "And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening," is that he was going out to pray. This is actually, you know, there are different verses in the Torah where we kind of get the basis for the different prayers we say during the day. And this is where kind of the source for mincha, right? So he was out praying in late afternoon, and then we have interpreted that as that's a time for prayer. So what we also say about this with Isaac is that he existed kind of on a higher spiritual plane than the average person, right? He's a person dedicated to God, to prayer, and this is kind of our source for that, right? She sees him, she gets off the camel. A lot of people say she fell off the camel, and when she finds out who it is, she veils herself. So this is a common action that people did back in those times. You know, we do it now with a veil. This is not the source of the veil for us in Jewish weddings, but covering herself out of modesty is something that she did. But we need to really look at this very closely, because their relationship, Isaac and Rebekah's, is very nuanced. It's very charged. We have, when we talk about them meeting each other in the Torah, it talks about them loving each other, which is not something that we typically hear about between biblical characters. It's not also something that was necessarily a goal of a partnership, of a marriage, but it says in one of the next couple verses that Isaac loved her. But we also see, and we'll look closely at it over the next couple of pages and next couple sources, that they had some flaws in their relationship that were really catastrophic to them, to their family, and to, you know, future generations. But looking at Rebecca right now, what we know, you know, just being humans living in the world, is that nothing is ever simple. Nothing is ever as it seems. People are multifaceted. You know, we have, on the one hand, we have this very empowered woman, take charge, goal-oriented, gets what she wants, very active character who, you know, then we see her kind of covering herself, and that seems a bit submissive. You know, we have kind of competing images of her, but there are, I think, really two sides of her and two sides of their relationship that go together based on, you know, how we see Rebecca and what she's dealing with. So let's look at both of these things, these two sides of her that we see through these three verses that we just read. So Carol Myers, who's a professor of religious studies at Duke, writes, when she first sees Isaac, she dismounts from her camel and veils herself, a non-verbal act signaling her status as a soon-to-be betrothed woman, as it does for elite women in ancient Assyria. That she dons the betrothal veil herself indicates her strength and independence, right? So here's one side of it. This is the first time that Isaac is seeing her, and she covers herself, right? So what kind of message is that sending to him? This might be an action that he typically would have done, but she's doing it. So what message is she immediately sending her soon-to-be husband?
Strength.
She's strong, right? Yes. What kind of, she's a strong person. He is not going to be in charge of her. They are going to be equal partners in this relationship, right? She's not going to take, you know, not going to be pushed around by anybody, right? So she's immediately showing him that. And this is in keeping with what we saw before, right? With her going down to the well, with her seizing her destiny, with her agreeing to go, with her getting the blessing, you know, and then she's continuing to kind of take her life into her own hands. She agreed to be here. She's going to marry this man, but she's going to do it on her own terms, right? She's going to show him immediately who she is. But on the flip side, we're going to, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes the Netziv, who is a famous 19th century commentator. And he says, the Netziv senses the distance from the very first moment Rebecca sees Isaac as he is meditating in the field, at which point she fell off her camel and covered herself with the veil. He comments, she covered herself out of awe and a sense of inadequacy, as if she felt she was unworthy to be his wife. And from then on, this trepidation was fixed in her mind. So we know from this, what he says, meditating in the field, or this, you know, being out there praying, whatever it is, that people have interpreted that as Isaac being closer to God on this different spiritual plane, which the Netziv is saying is making him basically inaccessible to Rebecca, and also making Rebecca feel totally inadequate compared to him or next to him, that she can't really relate to him, right? And because of this, from the start, their relationship is has this major kind of wrench in it where they can't talk to each other. They can't connect with each other, right? And we will see throughout their story that they are not good communicators. We actually do not see them interacting with each other basically at all in the text. And we already know from what we know about her story, we already know how this manifests and what happens, but this is where the Netziv says it starts right away. So they're married, and then they try to have a child. So we know with Sarah that she had a hard time getting pregnant. We know with in the future, Rachel has a hard time getting pregnant. It's a trope around our matriarchs, around biblical women, but they try for 20 years. She's not getting pregnant, not getting pregnant. Finally, she does. And it's a very hard pregnancy, right? So we know that she was pregnant with twins, but she did not know that. And so she's feeling crazy things going on, and she's not really understanding what's happening. And she is just beside herself, desperate. And so she goes and she prays to God. So it says, the children struggled in her womb, and she said, if so, why do I exist? She went to pray to God, and God answered her. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate people shall issue from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So can anybody tell me what is so remarkable about what we just read? She goes, she prays to God, and God says, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue from your body, 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And this is a huge 2 verses. Does anybody have an idea of why? Yeah, Cynthia.
I think it speaks to maybe metaphorically that, 2 nations cannot rise up at the same time, right? If one rises, the other will fall, and vice versa. So, I think you can, if you look back in ancient times, like for Rome, right? You have Rome's rising, other nations are falling. When Rome declines, other nations rise. So I don't know, maybe metaphorically that.
I mean, I love that. That's a great interpretation.
Richie has her hand up.
Oh, thank you.
In the past, any communication was usually more vague or more further out for the future, and this is very specific. It's immediate information.
Mm-hmm. So she's getting like a real answer. Oops, sorry.
Emily Warren said, I think it sets up the rivalry aspect of the story.
Sorry, my dog was free. Yes, so it's setting up the rivalry aspect, 100%. But also, she just received a prophecy, right? She went and she spoke to God, and God answered her, right? And he told her what was happening and why it was happening and what it means and what's happening in the future, right? We do not see that very often. We do not see that with women very often at all. But I want to put this on hold for 1 minute, and I want us to read this second text that's on this page. So, according to the Ramban, the word lidrosh, and I don't have that in here, but it's in the text if we were to have it in Hebrew, means to pray. Rebecca is troubled by the pregnancy and turns to God himself in prayer. God responds to her directly. She approaches God with demands. What is going on here? Why am I suffering so? What can the purpose be? Rebecca's actions during the pregnancy reflect a main element of her personality. Rebecca is a very dominant figure and does not wait to be invited to offer her opinion or take action. So again, totally in keeping with what we've been talking about with Rebecca, right? She's having a hard time. She's not going to wait around and try to figure out what's going on. She's going to go directly to the one that can give her an answer. She's going to go directly to God and ask, and she gets the answer, right? It's kind of just like Eleazar showing up in the well. She goes right there, and what does she get? She gets to go with him. So she very easily could have gone to Isaac, right? And Isaac, who we know is this very spiritual figure, could have gone to God on her behalf. But instead, she prays. We know also from the text, and I didn't bring it here, that Isaac does pray on her behalf, but not because she asked him. And he does not get this answer from God, right? God doesn't really respond. God responds to Rebecca. So here we're seeing, again, just another example of her taking charge, her taking action, and those actions being rewarded, right? But let's just pause for a second and let's just pretend we're Rebecca, right? We're married, we're in a relationship. We just found out some major information. Remember, they have one job, right? And that job is to continue the covenant. What did she just learn? She learned that she's going to have 2 children, but she also learned that the younger of the 2, the one who's born second, is the one that is going to receive the covenantal blessing. That is the one that is going to continue the covenant. The older shall serve the younger, is what God tells her, right? So the younger one is the one that is continuing the covenant, right? If this were you, remember, you are married. These are the children that you are going to be sharing with your husband. You have one job, and you literally just were told how that job is going to be fulfilled. What do you think you would do? What is literally the first thing you would do?
Go tell your husband.
Go tell your husband, right? Say, Isaac, we're going to have 2 babies, but the first one is not going to be the one that continues the covenant. It's going to be the second one. God just told me that. Think about what we know is coming down the pipeline, right? Like what's going to happen with the blessing and that whole debacle and that whole situation. She right here, as any person would have just immediately thought to do, would just go nip that in the bud, right? You go just tell your husband what the deal is, what you just found out literally from God. And there you go. It's all set. But she doesn't do that, right? She does not tell him ever. So we have the natural question is why, right? And so we have to understand that relationships aren't easy, relationships are messy, and while these are our matriarchs and our patriarchs, their relationships were not perfect in any way. And she doesn't tell her husband. And the question really for us is why? Why does she feel that she can't tell him? So we're going to read a source about this. So Rava Victor Mayerovich says, the Ramban explains that at first Rebecca did not tell Isaac about the prophecy regarding the 2 sons, either out of shame for having gone to seek counsel from God without Isaac's permission, or out of respect from the superior prophetic status of Isaac. Later on, she didn't tell him as she thought he would not be able to heed this prophecy as a result for his love of Esau, and would bless neither of his sons and leave it in the hands of God. She therefore preferred not to tell Yitzchak at all, so that he would bless wholeheartedly, although not knowing that he would bless Isaac, that he would be blessing Jacob, sorry. So here we see, maybe she felt that she couldn't tell him. Maybe she was ashamed. Here it's saying that, that she didn't go to Isaac to ask him to pray on her behalf, but she went directly to God. Also, Isaac didn't receive the prophecy, she did. So if we go back to what the Netziv was saying, that she just felt like she could not relate to Isaac because he existed on this different spiritual level, and she always carried that with her, and she really couldn't move past that. Here we see that in action, and we can understand that, right? I mean, to me, that seems relatable. She has all these, just assumptions and feelings about her husband, and they're not good talkers, and so she's never said that to him. They've never had a conversation about it. She gets this big news and she feels that it's going to hurt him because he didn't get it himself. So she just doesn't tell him. The other thing that I just want to see if I'm going to say this now. The other thing is that some people say that Isaac really never came down from the mountain, so that when he was taken to be sacrificed by his father, it was such a traumatic experience for him that he was forever changed. And when he came down, he was a different person. So when they say that he never came down from the mountain, that means when the whole situation was over and he was not sacrificed and he was able to leave that situation behind it, he could not do it. So again, we see that maybe she felt that she couldn't talk to him because he was not all there psychologically. There was something going on with him, and something this big she couldn't share with him. We also know, we talk a lot in this story about which parent favors which child. So Isaac, who we know is a passive figure, who does not go out and do things for himself, he favored Esav, his more active child, right? The one who goes out into the field and hunts, the one that brings in food. And Jacob, his other child, is more like him in that they call him an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He is a spiritual man. He studies, he learns, he stays inside. And so Isaac is more drawn to the active child than he is to Jacob. And so, putting aside all of the other things that we've talked about the spirituality elements, and maybe Rebecca feeling guilty that she received this prophecy, or even thinking about whether or not Isaac could, handle this news, if he was still experiencing severe trauma from things that happened to him when he was younger. Maybe she thought that his feelings for his child were just too strong for her to bring up the idea that it might not be Esav, that Esav might not be destined to receive the birthright. And so she doesn't tell him. And we know either from our lives or from situations that we've seen with other people that we make assumptions about people that are close to us in our lives, and that keeps us from either sharing things with them or communicating in a way that we want to communicate, and those decisions stay with us forever. So we're seeing that in action here, where as we're reading the text, we're like, no, don't, just tell him. But she doesn't do it. And as the reader, we can see everything that's happening, but her in the moment, she has so many different things going on in her mind, so many emotions, so many competing feelings and ideas and assumptions that she doesn't make the best choice. She can't see the future. We know it, but she does not. So she does what feels best for her in the moment, even if it's not the wisest choice. So I want us to kind of jump into the story of the blessings. And we touched on it a little bit, but does anybody remember, can anybody fill in the details of the story? So what happens with these two brothers, how the birthright goes from one to the next, how the blessings go? Can anybody fill in any of that for us? So we know that Jacob and Esau are together. Esau has just come in from hunting. He is starving, right? And Jacob had just made this stew, and then Esau says, give me some of that stew. And Jacob says, I'll give it to you in exchange for your birthright. And Esau's like, okay, whatever. And he does, and he takes the food and he eats it. And then years later, Isaac is on his deathbed. And so he's calling in the children to, so that he can bless them. And he wants Esau to come in first. But first he says that he wants him to go out and get an animal, hunt an animal so that he can prepare his favorite meal. And so in that time, Rebekah sends Jacob in to get the first blessing. She covers his arms with animal fur so that he's hairy, because Esau was a hairy person. And Jacob goes into Isaac to get the blessing, and he says, your voice is the voice of Jacob, but you feel like Esau. And he gives him the blessing of the birthright. And then Jacob leaves, and Esau comes in, and Esau and Isaac figure out what happened. And Esau says, is there no blessing for me? But Isaac is able to give him a blessing of the land, not the covenantal blessing, but a blessing of the land nonetheless. And because of all of this, Rebekah sends Jacob back to Canaan to run away so that, nothing can happen, back to, Aram Naharaim, so that Esau cannot take revenge on Jacob. And so that is the story of the blessings in a nutshell. But if we look at Rebekah, what assumptions do we make about Rebekah based on this story? And somebody, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, but somebody said it before. I think you used the word trickery, right? So what do we think about her in this moment when we read this story? And she's very calculating. Okay, yeah, thank you, Cynthia. Marcy?
I think she's also taking God's word to heart.
Mm-hmm.
When God said, this is the way it's going to be, and she was a religious person. And
right, she knew this information.
Right, this is what she didn't share with her husband after she got her sonogram results. And she's just taking that very seriously.
Yeah, Richie says she's making sure, just have to open it, the prophecy comes true, right? So doing what she needs to do, just like we saw her doing earlier.
Right.
But I just want to share a quick story from the summer because I can't get this out of my head. So I was teaching at Ramat Darom this summer, and one of the age groups was looking at biblical relationships, biblical families. And when we were talking about this story, we had the kids put each of the characters on trial, right? So we could figure out what was going on here. And the kids were rising 8th graders. So, they didn't have the ability to kind of look at the nuances and think about the characters and what was going on in their lives and the situations they were dealing with. But they were looking at it, the kind of with the information and the way we might look at it if we were learning the story as they did, in grade school or in Hebrew school or whatever it is. And every single one of them, every group, because we had different groups and they were interrogating different characters and it was really fun, but they all said, Rebecca's the bad guy, right? Rebecca is the one that is deceiving Isaac. She's stealing the birthright from Esau. She's the bad guy. They all said that. And if you do any kind of like Google search about Rebecca, it's like, you'll just see Rebecca's deception, so she is really, people, it's blamed. She is blamed for being the bad guy in this story. And we don't necessarily put her whole story together and think about the information that she had. And we have to kind of balance it with her limitations. Like we were saying before, she didn't communicate, she didn't share, which could have prevented this situation and also could have saved her reputation for, thousands of years to come. But still, she's scapegoated in this story, 100%. But she is trying to juggle a lot. So I want to read just 2 more texts that I just really love and I think are beautiful in trying to redeem her a little bit. So, okay, so back to Rabbi Dieman. Rebecca, the mother of these 2 boys, not only knew their true characters, but also understood the nature of blessings. Jacob needed the Birkat Haaretz, the blessing of the land, and the Birkat Avraham, the blessing of Abraham, so the covenantal blessing, in order to be the father of the Jewish nation. Esau, she knew, would be content with only the Birkat Haaretz, the blessing of the land, as he was a man consumed by desire for material and earthly things. So not only does she know what needs to happen, but she knows her kids and she knows what each of them needs in order to be happy and in order to get to where they need to get to. So Jacob ultimately needs to inherit this blessing, but because he's not a man of the land like his brother is, he needs to get that blessing of the land, that he will rule the land in order to have the confidence to not only continue the covenant, but to be kind of in charge of everything. Esau gets the same Birkat Haaretz, the same blessing over the land, but not that other blessing that is his birthright, right? Which we also see earlier in this story, he doesn't really care all that much about, right? He gives it away for a bowl of stew. So here she is trying to navigate this tricky situation of wanting both of her sons to be blessed, but also trying to fulfill the prophecy that she got from God. So this, again, I think is just in keeping with what we've seen from Rebecca the whole time, right? That she's a very active player in her own life, but also she's working within the constraints of a strained relationship, right? That she has to really try to backhandedly make sure that each child gets what they need without, because she can't have the conversation, because she can't say to Isaac, Jacob is the one that needs the covenantal blessing, but let's think of a blessing that Esau can get that would make him happy. So, she knows that by him going in second, because he's still Isaac's favorite, he's going to get some kind of blessing, and a blessing that can be given to multiple people is that of the land. And that for Esau would be a very powerful thing because we know that he's very connected to the land. So I loved that one. And then this next one is from this book that I've been reading, which is really wonderful. It's The Fruit of Her Hands, A Psychology of Biblical Women. And I loved this because I think it sums up Rebecca's story and what she is trying to do in such a beautiful way. So Rebecca manages to bring about both boys' blessings without demeaning Isaac and without causing a murderous conflict between her sons, both of whom she still loves and both of whom she is deeply concerned about. Rebecca handles this difficult situation with strength of character, calm wisdom, and a wholly positive attitude. She manages to provide both her sons with what they need and treat her husband with great respect. So, does anybody have any reactions to this last text that we just read?
That's from that book you just are reading now?
Yeah.
What's with the book?
It's called The Fruit of Her Hands.
So it doesn't match up with if you Google and find everything about Rebecca deceptive. They're not suggesting she's deceptive. They're suggesting that she knows what's best. And sometimes, you know, for those of us who have the blessing of children, sometimes we just know our children better. We know what's going to work for them instinctively. Without disrespecting my husband at all, I feel like I have a better instinct of what my children need at any given time.
Right.
I mean, I think some people might even say it's a sixth sense. I can tell. I wake up sometimes and I think something's going on with one of my kids, and I haven't spoken to them, you know, and I'll call and say, "Hey, something going on today?" It's just a sixth sense.
Yeah, thank you, Mercy.
Out of her hand.
Anybody else? Yeah, Cynthia.
I guess I hadn't thought about it before until now, but you know, maybe more from her point of view, right? Because the story's kind of glossed over, is what happens if one ignores a prophecy from God, right? God gives her this prophecy. Theoretically, you have to follow it. If she hadn't taken those steps, would there have been consequences to her, to her boys, if, again, she didn't take the steps to fulfill the prophecy handed down to her?
Yeah, I don't know.
And Richie said, it doesn't exactly line up with the immediate outcome of the story, Esau vowing to kill Yaakov.
Right. So that's why, you know, she sends Yaakov away. And he's gone for a long time. And eventually, when they do meet up, Esau doesn't want to kill him anymore. He doesn't kill him. They make up. So it takes a while for them to get over it. But she had to send him away in order for that to happen. But if she hadn't sent him, you know, her still like orchestrating this whole situation, he would have been killed. Esau would have retaliated, but he can't because he's not there. So, you know, down the line, there is no murderous conflict, right? So I just think that this text is very, in this just summing it all up, it really redeems her from this, I think, widely spread idea that, you know, she's deceiving and she's cunning and she's doing all of these things that are, you know, very negative. She's the one in the background pulling all the strings and making sure she gets what she wants, and she's the bad guy, when really she's just trying very, very, very hard to juggle all of these things that she knows and that she feels without feeling like she's able to just say it out loud. So she doesn't wait until the last minute when Esau is in there and run in and say, no, you can't give him the blessing. He's not the, you know, whatever would have happened, which would have been what it says here. She did it without demeaning Isaac. You know, she did not in any way, yes, he was tricked, but she does it in a way that's as gentle as she possibly could, while at the same time ensuring that both of her boys got blessings and then ultimately were able to live out the rest of their lives. So I look at Rebecca as this real heroine, and as this strong figure in our tradition, that I think we can relate to and learn a lot from, because she was a woman who was navigating difficult relationships, and also, just trying to make a place for herself in a man's world, and she was doing it successfully. So that is what I have to say about Rebecca, and I really enjoyed putting this class together and learning more about her and being able to share it with you tonight. So if anybody has any questions, I will be happy to do my best to answer. But thank you for being here, and I look forward to when we can learn about Rachel and Leah in our next class.
Gilda put in the chat, I don't think we ever, it's going up here fast, oh my gosh. I don't think we ever read the prophecy from God at the same time as the blessing story. Doing it this way lets us see her in a different way. Talia, who wrote that book you're referring to, The Fruit of Her Hands?
It's Matthew Schwartz and Kalman Kaplan.
Kalman?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
There's another book by that name, by Nancy Wilson, about the Christian world.
Well, anybody who would like to may borrow it from me.
Yes,
I'm happy
definitely.
to share.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions or anything for Talia? Well, Talia, thank you for another amazing, insightful, and just meaty program. So a lot to think about, and especially I think very timely as the High Holy Days are approaching. So I know I'm certainly thinking about Rebecca in a different way, and I'm going to do some more research and reading. So if any of you guys have any questions, please raise your hand, put them in the chat. I'm watching. I'm looking, I read, everyone's super happy and thanking you. And I'm going to stop the recording now. So let me see here.